My name is Jonas Abrams. I'm a billionaire. Or at least I was before I went up that mountain. If someone had told me I was going to be nearly burned alive by my 3 best friends, I would have called the guy crazy. But that's exactly what happened. And it all started because we can no longer trust anyone. Not even the person who calls you brother. I'm the owner of Bilter, the world's largest artificial intelligence fact-checking company. Until 2 weeks ago, my name was on the list of the richest men on the planet, ahead of pop stars, soccer players, and Arab princes. I had everything: money, prestige, access to presidents. I just didn't have peace, because while my company was trying to keep truth alive on the internet, there were people making trillions selling lies. One of those guys was my friend, Vance, or Ven, as everyone called him, the owner of Trom, the most powerful social media network the world has ever seen. His platform was spreading so much disinformation that governments were on the verge of collapse. And yet, Ven slept soundly, with a smile on his face. That weekend, he invited me, along with Randall and Hugo, for a retreat at a house in the mountains of Utah. The place was so high up you could see the whole world from there. They called it Mountain Head. Supposedly, we were going there to disconnect, with no cell phones, no press, just friends talking, laughing, and reminiscing about the old days. I went, because despite knowing the risk, I thought I could fix things with them. I thought that if I spoke to them calmly, they would understand that continuing to spread lies would end up destroying the world. Right from the helicopter, I felt something was wrong. Ven was smiling too much. Randall was too serious. And Hugo, poor guy, looked as nervous as someone who owes money to a loan shark. Ven clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Jonas, this weekend it's just us. No business, no press. Just the Brewsters together." Brewsters. That was the nickname we had since we were young entrepreneurs. Back then, we thought we were going to save the world. Now, I was sure they wanted to kill me. Hugo's house up at Mountain Head looked like something out of Iron Man. It was all glass, expensive wood, and carved stone. It had a giant fireplace, huge sofas, and abstract paintings that looked like they cost more than an apartment. Outside, the snow-covered mountains looked calm, but I knew there was nothing calm about them, because inside, a war was about to begin. The first night we were drinking whiskey in a room with a ceiling so high you could fit a football field in it. Ven raised his glass and said, "To the Brewsters, and to everything we've built." I toasted, but I didn't smile, because I knew what he wanted. The conversation started light, laughing about our first meetings in tiny rooms, the panic before the IPOs, the days when our biggest fear was the market dropping 2%. But soon Ven started bringing up Bilter. "Jonas, let's be serious. The world is falling apart. Trom needs your fact-checking technology. It's good for humanity. It's good for you." I took a deep breath. "Ven, you don't want to save the world. You want to save your company." He gave a cold smile. "It's the same thing, Jonas. Trom is the world." Randall, who had been quiet until then, joined the conversation. He said I should sell, that it was the only way to prevent governments from taking over the internet. Hugo, who hadn't said anything, suddenly blurted out that he also had a project called Slozo, a meditation super app. He wanted us to invest in it. I almost laughed, but I held it in, because Ven's face changed when Hugo spoke. He looked like he wanted to crush Hugo right there. At that moment, I understood I was alone. There were 3 of them. I was one, and I started to wonder if I would get off that mountain alive. I thought, there, in the middle of the snow, I realized the greatest danger wasn't the cold. It was the heat of betrayal coming from my own friends. That night, after the argument about selling Bilter, I went to my room without speaking to anyone. I paced back and forth, looking out the giant windows at the snow-covered mountains. The silence outside seemed beautiful, but to me, it was terrifying, because I knew that while the world below was exploding in crises caused by fake news, up here, my friends were deciding whether to kill me or not. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the house's wood made me jump out of bed. I was sure they would come in at any moment to silence me. I couldn't stop thinking about Ven, about his eyes. Always calm, always smiling, but ready to crush anyone who threatened his empire. The next day we woke up early. Hugo, or Super, as he loved to call himself, was jumping with excitement, talking about how he had organized a snowmobile ride up a neighboring mountain. Ven was all cheerful, as if nothing had happened the night before. Randall, more serious than ever, was fiddling with his phone even without a signal, just to avoid talking to anyone. I didn't want to go. My gut was screaming at me to stay inside the house, but I knew that if I refused, I would become an even bigger target. So I forced a smile and said I was in. We rode the snowmobiles up the mountain. The wind was so strong it felt like a razor cutting my face, but I barely felt the cold. The fear was greater. We reached a huge plateau, surrounded by cliffs and white pine trees. Ven got off his machine, opened his arms and shouted, "Look at this, my friends. This place is all ours." There, Randall suggested we do the Brewster ritual. It was a silly thing we invented years ago when we first became millionaires. We would write our net worths on our chest with lipstick to show who was on top. I didn't want to participate, but again, I couldn't say no. Ven took off his jacket, leaving him in a black t-shirt, and wrote $781 billion on his chest. Randall wrote his $143 billion. Hugo, a bit embarrassed, wrote $521 million. When it was my turn, I wrote $162 billion, and for a moment I thought they were going to applaud me. But Randall just stared at me. His face was red, full of anger, because I had just surpassed him on the list of the richest. There, in the middle of the snow, I realized the situation had just gotten 10 times worse. Randall said, his voice icy, "Congratulations, Jonas. The new number 2. You must feel like a king, don't you?" I tried to laugh, said it was just numbers on a screen, but he retorted that for us, numbers were everything. Ven put a hand on Randall's shoulder and said we shouldn't fight among brothers, that we had bigger things to solve. But the mood had already soured. We rode the snowmobiles back down without saying a word. When we got to the house, Hugo was chattering about Slozo, his super app. He said it would change people's lives, that it would combine meditation, personal finance, and even physical training all in one place. Ven didn't hide his contempt. He said Slozo sounded like garbage, that no one would invest in it. Hugo fell silent, but I could see on his face that he would hold that grudge forever. By late afternoon, the global chaos was worsening. Markets were plummeting, governments in crisis, protests erupting in several cities, all because of Trom, Ven's platform. And to make matters worse, Bilter's stock had soared 70% in a single day. My phone, which I had hidden away, started buzzing with notifications. The press was calling me the savior of truth. Randall, who saw my face as I read the messages, came up to me and said quietly, "You're going to sell, Jonas, even if it's the last thing I do." I asked if that was a threat. He replied, "It's a promise." The night fell heavily. It was so windy outside it felt like the house was going to fly away. I was sitting by the fireplace when Ven approached. He put his hand on my shoulder and said in an almost affectionate tone, "Jonas, you need to understand. If you don't give me Bilter, there will be blood, maybe even yours." At that moment, I was sure. There, in the warmth of the fireplace, I realized the fire that was going to burn me wouldn't come from the logs. It would come from my friends. After Ven told me there would be blood if I didn't hand over Bilter, I just stared into the fireplace, trying to pretend I was calm. But inside, I felt like I was sitting on a powder keg, and his every word was a lit match getting closer. I went to my room early. I closed the door, locked everything, and propped a chair against the knob. I wasn't taking the risk of waking up with a knife to my throat. I spent the night awake, watching the snow fall outside, and thinking that, just a few years ago, these guys were my brothers. We shared the fear of going broke. We shared cold pizza in the office. Now they wanted my head. When morning came, Hugo appeared, knocking on my door. He acted excited, as if nothing had happened. He was talking about Slozo again, how it was going to revolutionize the world, how it would mix yoga with financial investment. I could only reply, "Hugo, can we talk about this some other time? My head is full." But he insisted almost desperately, saying he needed our money, that he didn't want to be the only one of the Brewsters who didn't become a billionaire. You could see the shame on his face. I went down to the kitchen and found Randall sitting alone, fiddling with his phone, even without a signal. He had a hard expression, like he was rehearsing a plan in his head. He looked at me, stood up, and came very close. He said quietly, "Jonas, you're playing this wrong. If you keep this up, you're going to end up dead." I tried to laugh, but no sound came out. He added, "Ven will destroy you, and I'm not going to stop him." I was in shock. I asked if he was really on Ven's side. Randall said the world was changing too fast, and that, with his cancer advancing, he didn't have time to wait for ethical solutions. He said he needed to see Trom grow, because he believed Ven's technology could be the only thing capable of saving him. I tried to argue that using fake news to dominate the world wouldn't save anyone, but he cut me off. There is no right or wrong anymore, Jonas. Only winning or dying. At that moment, I felt I had no one on my side. We all went to the main living room. Ven was there, smiling as always, pretending it was just another day. He got 4 champagne glasses and passed them around. To the Brewsters, and to the future. I raised my glass without enthusiasm. Ven said he had an announcement to make. He said that after talking to the president on the phone, he had made a decision. Either I handed over Bilter or he would turn me into the most hated man on the planet. He said he could spread fake news so fast that in less than 24 hours, my image would be destroyed. He said he could make me look like a pedophile, a murderer, a terrorist. Whatever it took. I stood there holding the glass, my hands shaking. I looked at Randall and Hugo, hoping someone would say this was madness. But no one said anything. Randall stared at the floor. Hugo just scratched his head, not daring to look at me. Ven moved closer and said, "Jonas, what we do here defines the future of the world. Truth is relative. Control is absolute. Do you really think you can hold back the tide alone?" I couldn't answer. I just thought about everything I had worked to build, and how it could all end there, in the middle of the snow, because of 3 men I called brothers. Hugo tried to speak. He said we should stay calm, think clearly, that nothing justified killing a friend. Ven looked at him, irritated, and snapped, "Shut up, Hugo. You only speak when it suits you. You think you're worth less because you're not a billionaire, but today I'm telling you, you're worthless. Stay out of this." Hugo lowered his head. Randall pulled Ven into a corner and they started whispering. Hugo pulled me to the other side, trembling, and said he was scared, that he felt Ven and Randall were going to do something terrible to me. I told him to be quiet, not to draw attention, but Hugo insisted we needed to escape. That's when Ven came back, with that cold little smile, and said to me, "Jonas, I tried to solve this as a friend. Now I'll have to solve it as the owner of the world." And I thought, there, on top of that mountain, I realized that friendships don't exist when power is at stake. After Ven told me that now he would solve everything as the owner of the world, I was sure I was no longer at a simple retreat. I was in a trap. Ven turned and walked away as if nothing had happened. Randall stood there, looking at me with an expression that said he wanted to say something but didn't have the courage. Hugo, poor guy, looked like he was about to cry. I went to my room again. I closed the door, propped the chair against the knob, and sat on the edge of the bed. My head was spinning. I thought about everything that was at stake. I thought about my employees, their families, the millions of people who depended on Bilter to know what was true in the world. And I thought, mainly, that I might not get off that mountain alive. Outside, the wind howled so loudly it sounded like someone screaming. The whole house creaked. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Light, but steady. The sound grew louder, until it stopped right at my door. I held my breath. I heard someone lean their face against the door, and then a voice whispering, "Jonah, open the door." It was Randall. I hesitated, but I pushed the chair away and unlocked the door. Randall entered quickly, closed it behind him, and just stood there staring at me. He said softly, "Ven is determined to kill you. He thinks that if you disappear, Bilter will end up being sold to him anyway." I asked if Randall was in on it with him. Randall took a deep breath, ran a hand over his face, and replied, "I don't want to be a part of this, but Ven, he won't stop. And the worst part is, he really thinks he's saving the world." I asked what Randall wanted from me then. He said I should agree to sell Bilter, that if I signed the deal maybe they would let me live. I started to laugh, but it was a nervous, almost hysterical laugh. "Randall, you're asking me to give up everything I've built, and then smile about it?" He looked down. He said he knew what he was asking, but he'd rather see me alive than dead. I told him that Ven wouldn't stop just because I signed some paper, that after I was useless, he would silence me anyway. Randall was quiet, and that's when I realized that, deep down, he knew I was right. Then he told me something else. He said Ven was planning a global coup, that he wanted to use the chaos created by Trom to overthrow governments and establish a technocratic regime. He said Ven dreamed of being the man who ruled the entire planet. I asked why Randall was telling me all this. He replied, "Because I'm sick, Jonas, and I don't want to die carrying more guilt than I already do." There, for the first time, I saw Randall vulnerable. The man who had always been our mentor, the wisest of the group, was trembling. I asked if he would help me. Randall said he couldn't, that if he went against Ven, he'd end up dead too. He apologized, turned his back, and left the room, leaving the door ajar. I stood there staring at the crack in the door. The wind was whipping outside, kicking up swirls of snow. I thought about what Randall had said, about Ven dreaming of controlling the world, about no one being able to help me, and I realized I was completely alone. I went down to the kitchen, shaking, needing a glass of water. I found Hugo sitting at the table, hugging a bottle of whiskey, his gaze lost. He looked at me and said, "Jonah, we've gotten into a game that's too big for us." I couldn't say anything back. Hugo started talking about how he was thinking of escaping the mountain. He said he had seen a path out back, that maybe it led down to a road. I asked if he was crazy, that if we tried to escape, Ven would have us hunted down. Hugo cried. He said he just wanted to go back to being someone normal. I looked at him and thought how ridiculous we were. 4 billionaire men with enough money to buy entire countries, and yet trapped in a deadly game, afraid of dying. At that moment, I realized that there isn't enough money in the world to buy you safety when your friends become your enemies. After Hugo told me about escaping, I stood in the kitchen holding the glass of water, trying to decide if he was going crazy or if I was being a coward. Deep down, I knew that escaping wouldn't work. Ven had too many resources, too many contacts. Even if I managed to get off the mountain, I wouldn't last 2 days out there. As I was thinking this, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the hall. It was Ven. He walked into the kitchen smiling, as if he owned the place. He looked at Hugo, then at me, and said, "You two are conspiring, aren't you? I can smell the fear from here." I tried to play it cool. I said we were just talking about business, but Ven didn't buy it. He leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and started talking about Bilter again. He said I had no idea what was at stake. He said that if I handed over Bilter, he could save the planet, that only he had the courage to do what needed to be done. Hugo tried to say something, but Ven cut him off. "Hugo, be quiet. You have no idea the scale of this game. You want to sell detox juice while the world is falling apart. You're not a part of this." Hugo turned red and looked down. I looked at Ven and said, "The world doesn't need dictators. It needs truth, and Trom is destroying any chance of truth existing." Ven laughed slowly. He said, "I still didn't get it. That truth is just another commodity, and whoever controls it, controls everything." He said, "Jonas, you might have billions, but I have billions, and I control the narrative. You think this is just the internet? This is real power." At that moment, I felt my stomach churn, because I knew he was right about one thing. Public opinion was becoming a weapon, and whoever controlled that ruled the world. Ven came closer, lowered his voice, and said I had until the next morning to decide. Either I handed over Bilter, or he would destroy me, and not just financially. He said he could create scandal so big that no one would ever want to come near me again. "I can turn you into the villain of the century, Jonas. I can put your face on headlines for pedophilia, terrorism, murder. I can make the whole world hate you in 24 hours. I control what people believe." I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my company. I was fighting for my own identity, for my life. Ven clapped me on the back and walked away, as if he had just been talking about the weather. Hugo looked at me, his face white with fear. He said he didn't want to die there, that he didn't want to see blood. I could only reply, "I don't think anyone does, Hugo. But sometimes we're not the ones who choose." The afternoon dragged on. Everyone stayed in a different corner of the house, pretending nothing was happening. Ven spent hours in the living room, looking at graphs on his laptop. Randall disappeared into his room. Hugo just cried in corners. In the late afternoon, Ven called us all into the living room. He said it was time for one last meeting, that it was time to decide everything. He brought a huge decanter of wine and 4 glasses. He served each of us, made a toast, and said, "To the Brewsters, may we leave here stronger." I raised my glass, but I didn't drink. Ven turned to me and said he had a proposal. He said that if I signed an agreement right then and there selling Bilter to Trom, he would guarantee my safety. He said he would even let me stay on as CEO for a few more years, just to make it look like nothing had changed. I was quiet. I looked at Randall, searching for some sign of support, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. Hugo just stared at the floor. Ven then took an envelope out of his pocket. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward me. "It's the contract, Jonas. Just sign, or you know what happens." I was trembling, not from the cold, but because I was facing the biggest dilemma of my life. If I signed, I would be giving up everything I had built. But if I didn't sign, I might not leave there alive. Ven leaned his face close to mine and said softly, "Jonas, it's not personal, it's just business. But if you get in the way of my business, It will end badly for you. At that instant, I realized that Ven wouldn't stop as long as I existed as an obstacle, and for the first time I began to seriously think about how I could get out of there alive. When Ven pushed that contract in front of me, I stared at the paper as if it were a ticking time bomb. My name was there, on a stack of pages printed on thick stock, full of clauses, fine print, astronomical figures. If I signed, technically I would be safe, but at the same time, I would be killing myself, because Bilter was everything I had built. I took a deep breath and pushed the contract back to him. "I'm not signing, Ven." He stared at me, unblinking, and asked if I was sure about what I was doing. I said I was, and that I'd rather die owning the truth than live as his puppet. Randall let out a sigh so loud it sounded like the wind outside. Hugo just looked back and forth between us, not knowing what to do with his hands. Ven licked his lips, took a deep breath, and said that wasn't the answer he wanted to hear. He said, "You know, Jonas, I've always admired your courage, but courage is worthless against power, and today, I am power." I tried to stand firm. I told him he could try to destroy me, but the world wouldn't stay silent. That there were governments, laws, the press. Ven gave a short laugh. He said if I still believed that governments were in charge of anything, I was more naive than he thought. The government doesn't control anything anymore, Jonas. I'm the one who runs the world, and anyone who doesn't understand that disappears. At that moment, Randall stood up. He was shaking. He looked at Ven and said, "We agreed it wouldn't come to this." Ven turned to him, his gaze icy, and replied, "We agreed that Jonas would cooperate. He is not cooperating." Randall was out of arguments. He sat back down, silent. Ven approached me. He put his hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard. He said life was made of choices, and that my choice would decide if I went home, or if they'd have to send for my body in the spring thaw. I pulled away from him, knocked his hand off my shoulder, and said, "You're not going to kill me, Ven. You need me. If you kill me, you lose the only way to legitimize the purchase of Bilter." He looked at me thoughtfully, as if recalculating his strategy. It was then that Hugo chimed in again. He started saying that he didn't want to see anyone dead, that we could reach an agreement, that Slozo could be part of the deal. Ven shouted at him, "Hugo, nobody cares about your breathing app, man. This is about power, not wellness." Hugo shut his mouth, but I noticed his expression changed, like a switch had been flipped. Ven took the contract and tore it up very slowly. He threw the pieces on the floor and said, "Okay, Jonas, you don't want to sign? Then we'll do it my way." I asked him what he was going to do. He replied, "I'm going to make the whole world hate you. I'm going to invent the worst possible thing, and I'm going to spread it until no one wants to even come near you." Randall tried to intervene, but Ven cut him off sharply. He said that whoever wasn't with him was against him. Randall then fell silent again. I stood up from my chair. I said I wasn't going to just stand there and wait for them to kill me. Ven smiled like someone amused by a child's tantrum and said, "Run where, Jonas? You think there's anywhere in the world I can't reach you?" I didn't answer. I left the room and went to my own. I started throwing my things into a suitcase without even really thinking about what I was packing. I knew it was crazy to try to escape, but staying there was a certain death. I heard quick footsteps in the hallway. Hugo burst into the room, breathless. "Jonas, I heard everything. We need to get out of here tonight. Now, before they do something stupid." I told him Ven would know if we tried to escape, that it was suicide. But Hugo grabbed my arm hard and said, "I'd rather die trying than die sitting around waiting." He was crying as he spoke. I looked at him and I couldn't disagree, because at that point staying put didn't seem any safer than running. Hugo was standing in my doorway holding my arm with a grip so tight I could feel his fingers trembling. He kept repeating that we had to get out of there before it was too late. And for the first time I realized he was willing to do anything. I dropped the suitcase on the floor and asked him how he planned to get out of the house without anyone noticing. Hugo said that the night before, while I was in my room, he had found a way out through the back, a service corridor that led to a side door. He said that if we were fast, we could get the snowmobiles and ride down to a point on the road. I shook my head, trying to think clearly. The idea was almost suicidal, but honestly, I didn't see another option. Staying there was waiting for Ven to decide to disappear me. Hugo said he would grab some of his things and meet me at the back exit in 5 minutes. I just asked him not to draw any attention. He ran off. I started shoving some clothes and documents into a backpack, my hands shaking. I thought of my children. I thought of the team at Bilter who had no idea what was happening to me. As I was zipping up the backpack, I heard loud voices from downstairs. It was Ven, shouting something at Randall. I moved closer to the door, my heart racing, trying to listen. Ven was saying that I was holding back the future, that I was weak, that I needed to be eliminated. Randall was replying that he had lost all sense of limits, that this had nothing to do with business anymore. The two of them started arguing so loudly I thought they were going to come to blows. I took advantage of their distraction and slipped out of the room. I walked down the hall, praying I wouldn't run into anyone. I reached the service area, which looked like a maze of doors and pantries. Hugo was already there, holding a flashlight and a bag that seemed full of random things. When he saw me, he whispered, "It's now or never." I just nodded. We went through the side door and out into the biting cold of the night. The wind hit my face like a razor, but I barely felt it. The fear was so great, it numbed every other sensation. Hugo pointed to the back of the house, where the snowmobiles were parked. I counted 4. One of them had its seat covered in snow. We ran to them. It was then that the main door of the house flew open. The bright light spilled out onto the snow, and I saw Ven's shadow projected on the white ground. He shouted my name. His voice echoed through the entire mountain. I didn't look back. Hugo got on the first machine, started the engine, and signaled for me to get on the other. I sat down, hit the ignition button, and heard the roar of the engine mix with the sound of the wind. Ven was shouting things I couldn't understand. I only caught a fragment. "You're not getting away." I accelerated. The machine shot forward, kicking up snow everywhere. Hugo followed right behind. We sped down the narrow trail, past twisted pine trees and ice-covered rocks. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst through my chest. The path was almost invisible. The snow covered everything, and the only light came from the weak headlights of the machines. I gripped the handlebars so tightly my fingers ached. Behind us, I could still hear Ven's shouts fading into the darkness. Hugo was right on my tail. Every so often I'd check the rearview mirror, expecting Ven to appear on another machine, but no one came. When we reached a flatter section, Hugo pulled up alongside me. He shouted over the noise of the engine that we needed to find a place to hide. I didn't know whether to answer or just keep accelerating. It was in that moment that I realized I had lost everything. My company, my security, my old life. And deep down, what hurt the most was knowing it wasn't some unknown enemy who had done this to me. It was my own friends. We continued down the mountain until we reached a section where the snow was so dense it was like a white wall. It felt like the world was telling us there was no easy way out. But I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to let Ven win. The snow hit my face like needles as Hugo and I descended the mountain. The sound of the engines mixed with the wind sounded like the roar of a monster trying to swallow us. Hugo was shouting my name, trying to coordinate where we were going. But I couldn't even think straight. My head just kept repeating the same phrase. Ven is coming after us. We passed through a narrow stretch. I almost fell off the machine when a large rock appeared in the path. I managed to swerve at the last second. Hugo almost lost his balance too. I saw him shout, but I didn't hear the sound. The wind and fear muffled everything. We reached a flatter area where the trees were more spread out. I stopped the machine, breathing heavily. Hugo pulled up beside me. He took off his helmet, panting, and said, "Jonas, we're not going to make it down to the road. Ven will send people after us. He won't give up." I told him we couldn't go back. If we went back, it was certain death. Hugo just stared at me, desperate. He said he didn't want to die, that he didn't want to be found frozen in the snow. I tried to tell him to be calm, but honestly, I wasn't calm at all. We decided to continue downward, to try to find somewhere to hide. We rode for a few more minutes until we found an old cabin, almost covered in snow. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. I turned off my machine, got off, and pushed the door. It opened with a creak. The inside smelled of damp wood and mold, but it was better than freezing to death outside. Hugo came in after me, trembling. We stood there, in the dark, listening only to the sound of the wind hitting the walls. He threw himself onto a wooden bench and started talking softly. "I just wanted to be somebody, Jonas. I just wanted to be one of you." I stayed quiet, leaning against the wall. Hugo kept talking. He said he had spent his whole life trying to be accepted, trying to get to the same level as Ven, as Randall, my level. He said Slozo was the only chance he had to be remembered for something big. I asked him if it was all worth it, if it was worth losing your soul just to have your name on a list of billionaires. He cried. He said he didn't know anymore. We were silent for a few minutes. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Every gust of wind that hit the cabin made me think someone was coming. It was then that Hugo told me something that knocked the wind out of me. He said that the night before, when I was locked in my room, Ven and Randall had talked about killing me. He said they had planned to catch me by surprise while I slept, but that Hugo had convinced them to postpone it, saying there was still time for me to change my mind. I stared at him, unable to speak. Hugo looked down and said, "I tried to protect you, Jonas, but now I don't think even I am safe anymore." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back tears. Suddenly, outside, we heard the sound of an engine, distant but coming in our direction. Hugo turned pale. He looked at me with panic written all over his face. "It's Ven. He's found us." I told him to be calm, that maybe it was just someone passing by, but I didn't believe it myself. The sound got louder. Hugo started shaking so much it looked like he was going to fall apart. I went to the broken window and looked outside. I saw headlights cutting through the snow, weaving between the trees. It was just one machine. But in that darkness, one machine was enough to finish us. Hugo pulled my arm, whispering that we needed to get out of there. I said there wasn't time. If we ran, they'd catch us in the open. The only chance was to stay quiet and pray they didn't see us. The machine's light got closer to the cabin. The engine slowed to a near stop. I held my breath. Hugo covered his mouth with his hands, trying not to make a sound. I stood there motionless, looking through the crack in the wood as the snow fell relentlessly outside. That moment seemed to last an eternity. I had my eye glued to the crack in the wooden wall, feeling my heart beat so loud it was like a drum. The light from the snowmobile stopped right in front of the cabin. The headlight illuminated the snow, creating giant shadows of the surrounding trees. I tried to see who was riding it, but the helmet's visor was down. The person just sat there without getting off the machine, just looking toward the cabin. Hugo was holding my arm so tight it felt like he was going to break it. Suddenly, the headlight moved a little. The rider seemed to be scanning the area. Hugo whispered in my ear, "It's him. It's Ven. I know it is." I didn't know if it was Ven, but I knew that if it was, we were toast. The rider turned off the engine. The noise stopped, and all that was left was the sound of the wind whipping through the snow. For a second, I thought maybe it was just someone who was lost, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The rider finally got off the machine, stepped slowly into the snow as if not wanting to make a sound. Hugo covered his mouth to stifle a scream. The person walked up to the cabin window, stood so close I could almost feel their breath through the cracks. I was motionless. I didn't even blink. It was then that I heard Ven's voice, low but perfectly clear. "Jonah, I know you're in there." Hugo squeezed my arm even tighter. Ven continued, "Come on out. Let's talk like men. No drama." I didn't answer. Ven sighed and said, "If you think you can run from me, you're mistaken. The whole world is my stage. I have eyes everywhere. You have nowhere to go." I looked at Hugo, who was pale as a ghost. I whispered for him not to make a sound. Ven slammed his hand against the wooden wall as if testing its strength. "Jonas, are you going to make me do this the hard way?" I didn't say anything. Ven then started to walk around the cabin. Every step he took made the wood creak. Hugo was crying softly. I tried to think fast. If he decided to come in, we were unarmed with nothing. We wouldn't even have a chance to fight. Suddenly I heard Ven speaking louder. "I tried to do this the right way, but you're forcing me to use methods I didn't want to." He paused. "You know what the biggest problem is with idealists, Jonas? They think the world can be saved, but the world doesn't want to be saved." I closed my eyes, holding back anger and fear at the same time. Ven went back to the front of the cabin and said in a cold tone, "You think the government is going to protect you? They're begging me to solve the problems they can no longer control. You think you're special? You're just another guy who's going to disappear." Hugo pulled my jacket, whispering that we needed to escape through the back. I told him there was no way. If we left, Ven would see us immediately. Ven, outside, took a few steps back. He stood looking at the cabin in silence. And then he said, "Last chance, Jonas. Either you come out now, or I'll end your life. And I'm not just talking about killing you. I'm talking about destroying who you are, making the whole world hate you, making your family disgusted by you." My heart was racing. I knew he was capable of all that. Ven turned his back and started walking toward his machine. I thought he was leaving, but he stopped, turned around again, and said, "Think about it. You have until morning." He started the machine and took off, kicking up snow everywhere. I stood there, listening to the sound of the engine fade into the distance. Hugo finally let go of my arm, but he was still shaking all over. He said, his voice hoarse, "He's coming back, and next time, He won't ask any questions. I knew he was right. I thought about how, in less than 2 days, everything I believed in had crumbled. My friends had become my executioners. My company had become a reason to have me killed, and the world outside was exploding, without even knowing that everything could be being decided right there, on a frozen mountain. The sound of Ven's engine faded until there was only the wind cutting through the snow. I stood there, staring into the darkness, my chest rising and falling as if I'd run a marathon. Hugo sat on the cabin floor, leaning against the wall, hugging his knees. He looked like a scared child. "Jonas, we need a plan. If we stay here, he'll come back and kill us." I knew he was right, but at that moment I couldn't think of anything but exhaustion. I sat on a wooden bench and ran my hands over my face. Everything was raw, from my stubble to my scalp. I kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Ven over the last few years. Every fake smile, every champagne toast, every time he said we were brothers. Now he was willing to burn the whole world down to keep his empire. Hugo started talking, his voice low, almost weak. "We should have just stayed in our lane. You at Bilter, me with my Slozo. Let these guys destroy each other." I didn't answer, because I knew that even if we had stayed quiet, Ven would have found a way to come after Bilter. We were silent for a long time. All you could hear was the wind howling outside, hitting the wooden walls as if trying to get in. After a few minutes, I said to Hugo, "I'm getting down this mountain. I'm going to find a phone, the police, the government, anything. I can't let Ven win." Hugo asked, his voice choked. "And what if there's no one to listen to you, Jonas? What if everyone out there has already been bought by him?" I took a deep breath. "Then I'll keep trying, because if I do nothing, I'm already dead." Hugo shook his head, looking defeated. But deep down I could see he still wanted to live. I started to plan the route in my head. I needed to get out of there before Ven came back, but I couldn't do it in total darkness. I told Hugo we would wait a couple of hours until the sky started to lighten. Then we would try to ride the machines down until we found a road. Meanwhile, Hugo asked me, "Do you think he'll really release everything about you? Make the whole world hate you?" I replied, "I wouldn't put anything past him. But if I'm going down fighting." I thought about my family, about my employees, about the people at Bilter who believed in me, and I thought that if Ven won, there would be nothing true left in the world. The wind gusted stronger, shaking the whole cabin. Hugo looked at me with wide eyes. "It sounds like the world is ending out there." I gave a tired half smile. "Maybe it is." Time passed slowly. With every noise outside, Hugo would flinch. I just stared at the door, expecting it to burst open at any second. Finally, the sky began to lighten. A pale blue started to appear between the clouds. I stood up, looked at Hugo and said, "It's time." Before Ven realizes we're still alive, we left the cabin slowly. The cold hit my face like a slap. The snowmobiles were covered in snow. We had to clear them off quickly, with frozen hands, until we could start the engines. Hugo still hesitated. He said he was afraid of dying in the middle of the mountain. I replied that if he stayed, the result would be the same. We got on the machines and started down. The sun was beginning to rise behind the mountains, but everything still looked gray, frozen, empty. As I rode, I thought about Ven, about his eyes, about the certainty with which he spoke of controlling the world, and I realized he truly believed it. We reached a point where we could see a stretch of road below. It looked deserted, but at least it was civilization. Hugo shouted that everything was going to be okay, but I wasn't so sure. I stopped my machine on a high point and looked one last time at Mountain Head at the summit. It looked so beautiful from a distance. No one would ever imagine how much betrayal, fear, and madness was inside. I turned to Hugo and said, "I don't know what's going to happen now, but if I have to fight for the rest of my life to stop Ven, then that's what I'm going to do." Hugo didn't answer. He just nodded, his eyes full of tears, and we rode down the mountain not knowing if we would make it to the bottom alive. But for the first time in days, I felt something that Ven couldn't control: hope.
All right, it's that time. If this story has you hooked, let's do the full ritual. Hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss a beat, and ring that bell to be the first to know what's coming. Your opinion is golden, so drop it in the comments below.